There were fireworks at the White House today out of a meeting on Syria after they say the president Democrats said the president insulted House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, calling her a third-rate politician to her face. Pelosi portrayed the president's behavior as a meltdown.
Earlier today, the House of Representatives voted, 354 to 60 in opposition to the actions that he has taken in Syria. He was shaken up by it.
We have to pray for his health because this was a very serious meltdown on the part of the president.
The president came in, to my observation, angry and defensive. And frankly, it got worse from there.
He was insulting, particularly to the speaker. She kept her cool completely. But he called her a third-rate politician.
Which I said, I wish you were a politician, Mr. President.
I think it's a very sad commentary on the President of the United States.
Now, NBC News reports that during the meeting, the president suggested there were communists in Syria and said that Democrats would like that. He also went after his former defense secretary, Jim Mattis, for his comments that ISIS would resurge if the U.S. fails to keep pressure on it. Trump called Mattis, quote, the world's most overrated general. White House responded to the Democrats' portrayal of the meeting, saying in a statement that, quote, the president was measured, factual, and decisive in the meeting. I'm joined now by Jonathan Lemire, White House reporter for the Associated Press, and Charlie Sykes, editor-at-large for The Bulwark. Jonathan Lemire, let me just start with you. This meeting, let's just sort of set the scene here. Pelosi, Schumer, Hoyer, we saw them. There were some other Democrats there meeting with the White House. The subject here was Syria, was foreign policy, and what happened?
Well, we've now had a few rather eventful meetings between the president and Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer at the White House. Some have ended rather abruptly, like this one. Yes, you're right. The topic was Syria, but as they got in there, the president started bitterly complaining about the impeachment proceedings. And I think that is something that has really come to light here in recent weeks. We've seen the president's rage on this topic as the impeachment inquiry has begun. You know, there is a political calculation here being made by the White House and Republicans close to the president that they think impeachment could be a winner for him. They think that, the public doesn't want this, although we are seeing, of course, polls trending in the other direction. But they've long believed for months now that the public didn't want this, that the president could play the martyr card, that, if they push this into 2020, they could paint it as purely political and partisan. However, the president himself was not into that idea. He has to understand the political calculus behind it, but he's been very uncomfortable with the idea of being impeached. He's told people around him he fears, even if the Senate doesn't remove him, that it would be the first line of his political obituary, that he was the third president to be impeached. And he feels anxious about the whole thing, and we're seeing that anger burst out in recent days. And it did today, of course, with Speaker Pelosi. And the White House now has even put out a photo of them gathered around the meeting with Pelosi standing up, sort of gesturing at the president. And the president put it out, suggesting that it makes her perhaps look weak or rude to the commander-in-chief in the White House. But if you look at the picture more carefully, you'll see that everyone around the president has their heads down and bowed, and that Pelosi perhaps looks like a command position of strength. And the Democrats walked out of the meeting soon thereafter.
And Charlie Sykes, we mentioned, too, there, the president's comments, reportedly the president's comments about Jim Mattis. And you can think back a couple years ago, obviously brought him into his cabinet, Trump did. Trump used to celebrate him at public events, talk about him as Mad Dog. He seemed to love that nickname. From that reverence to what he's saying today, what do you make of it?
Well, first of all, it's going to be a really long year, isn't it? Look, this president has been petty and petulant before, but you really got the sense, as Jonathan described, that he's also rattled by this. This did not seem to be the performance of a confident man, but also his willingness to insult men like General Mattis, I think it carries some risk for him, because one of his strongest constituencies has been the military, right? He wants to bond himself to the military. And you talk to anybody in the military or national security, and they have the utmost respect for Jim Mattis. And Jim Mattis has been very restrained and very reluctant to speak out until now. But again, here's a president who is acting out of glandular impulse, making decisions of life or death, while clearly ignoring and now insulting his own generals. It's got to be one of those, it's a moment where, again, perhaps we're not learning anything new about who Donald Trump is, but it certainly underlines it in a very dramatic way.
You mentioned, too, John, your sense of Trump's frustration just at the presence of the impeachment inquiry. that it was him versus Pelosi in that meeting today. Does that say anything? Because I can remember in sort of the first couple years of his presidency, it wasn't that he was friendly with Pelosi, but he seemed to be less hostile to her. Maybe Is that a fair way of saying it than some other folks? And that's changed dramatically.
He respected her. He told people around him that he thought that she was a good politician, not a third-rate politician. That he did think that when she assumed the speakership, that they'd be able to work out some things. They'd be able to make some deals. That, of course, has not really come to pass, as they've had developed a very adversarial relationship, goaded on by some of the investigations this year, with the Democrats launching probe after probe and the White House stonewalling them at every turn. And now, of course, the impeachment inquiry, which has really changed things. And I think the fact that this explosion happened at a Syria meeting is not a coincidence either, because it's that topic is one of the very few where Republican senators have been very vocal about breaking with him, including some of his staunchest allies like Lindsey Graham. And while still unlikely that enough Republican senators would defy the GOP rank and file, who find the president still very popular, his polling with them, as you well know, is very high. But if he is impeached, it will be the Republican senators who have his fate in their hands. They're the ones who would vote in a trial to remove him from office. And I think there's a sense as well that the Syria thing has really, the president's just simply not used to taking criticism from all sides, including those Republicans in the Senate who normally have stood by him.
And that's another element here. The House had just voted against his Syria policy, with a lot of Republicans crossing over right before that meeting. Also, Senator Mitch McConnell, the Republican majority leader, he was in the White House meeting as well. He just told reporters, quote, "I didn't have anything to say in the meeting, and I don't have anything to say about it now." Charlie, what is your sense, too? Just Jonathan brings up how Republican senators are reading Trump right now, how they're looking at him. What's your sense of what they're seeing and how they're processing it?
Well, it can't be enhancing their confidence in the commander-in-chief. And I think one of the things that is frustrating President Trump is he's used to being able to dictate events, right? He's used to being able to dictate the news cycle. And this is an incident, and right now what we're seeing in Syria, where it's clearly out of his control. He does not actually control the messaging the way that he would like. And, among the, it's not just Republicans in the Senate who are looking at this, and even members of the House who are willing to vote against him. But there are some significant constituencies out there, including evangelical Christians, who have been very, very hostile. I thought it was very interesting that Lindsey Graham went on Pat Robertson's show on CBN on the 700 Club and compared Donald Trump to Barack Obama, said he was pursuing an Elizabeth Warren foreign policy. In the world of Republican conservative politics, this is firing real bullets, because this is the first time that I can remember that you have seen the president willing to alienate conservative Christian voters as part of his base. So he's got more political problems than I think that he's willing to admit at the moment.
All right. Charlie is sticking around. Jonathan, thank you, though, for joining us. Appreciate that.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.